So the time is coming. Time is coming. We are coming to the end of our time here at the Tierra Santa Seventh-day Adventist Church. Vision was born here. And we kind of grew up here, and just like the baby bird who's got its feathers now, it's time we leave the nest. So we're looking for a new home right now, and I thought what better time than now to have Pastor Gary come and speak to us and let us just love him up and fill him with the gratitude that we have for being able to be here for 6 years in his lovely home. So please welcome Pastor Gary McCary.
Sit down, sit down. It is with some embarrassment that I say hello to you, because after all, we're the ones that are kicking you out. And that's really kind of embarrassing, and it is with no malice, it is with no ill will, really isn't. There is a desire by a large number of people on my church board in particular to have some freedom to do some things, and so we're going to bid you adieu. We're not pushing you out quickly, and in fact, as the leadership continues to struggle finding that perfect spot to go, which will come, every request for extension will probably be granted. We're not going to be mean and cruel. You're welcome. 22 years ago, when I was invited to be the pastor of the Tierra Santa Seventh-day Adventist Church, I was 39 years old. I'm 61 now. 39 years old. I was just a kid. I didn't know anything, and I know just a little bit more now. If this is your first time here at Vision, please come back. I am not the pastor. My humble, stumbling attempt at saying something of value will be far surpassed by Reverend Patty if you come back. Okay, so don't let this be your last time here. First impressions are important, and hopefully the rest of the experience outside of this little sermon is what really counts and what really matters to you. So I'm reminded of and I just thought of this morning when I saw the Vision sign as I came driving up the hill. There is a wonderful little statement in the Hebrew book of Proverbs that maybe you've heard before. It goes like this: where there is no vision, the people perish. So it's vital that vision remain vibrant and active, because where there is no vision, the people perish. So I'm 6'7". I grew up in Needles, California, out in the desert, halfway between hell and purgatory. I'm a lifetime Seventh-day Adventist. I'm a huge sports fan, and I want to congratulate, even though he didn't do a thing to deserve it, John Kirko, whose Michigan Wolverines will be in the NCAA basketball finals. John will not be able to really concentrate on any other subject for the next 48 hours, or actually 29 hours or something, until the game starts tomorrow night. But when you're a sports fan and your favorite team makes it to the championship game, it's such a rush, and it's so wonderful. And those of you who are not sports fans think this is the most insignificant, stupid thing. I know, you just think it's the most stupid thing, but if you grew up with it, it's part of who you are, and it's hard to shake. I don't think you ever can completely shake it. So I am a Christian pastor, and our faith is based somewhat on the Bible. I'm not a Bible thumper. For those of you who don't know me, I'm what's considered a progressive or liberal Christian pastor. But I do respect this book, and so I'm going to share with you a story that most of you are familiar with, but some may never heard from the Bible. And before I do that, I want to tell you I didn't have a good night's sleep last night. I keep having this recurring dream. And the dream is very disturbing. You know, in this dream, and this has happened to me over a period of years, I go to heaven. I've died, and my spirit has gone to heaven, and I'm met there by a man named Peter. His last name is Falk. You may have heard of Peter Falk. He's no saint, I got to tell you. And he takes me on a guided tour of this fantastic place called heaven. And as we're walking down, there are these magnificent buildings. And there's one particular giant building, the largest thing I've ever seen, bigger than a stadium, a domed stadium, where the Michigan Wolverines will play tomorrow night. And I say, can we go in there? He says, sure. So we walk in, and the walls, floor to ceiling, and a high ceiling, are covered with what looks like clocks. They're not really clocks, but you know, they're these round things with a hand on them, one hand, not two hands, just one hand. And each clock, I'll call them a clock, has a gold metal plate underneath it with a name engraved. And I said to Peter, I said, what do these represent? What is this? And he said, oh, those are all the people who are still alive back on earth. And every time they sin or make a big mistake, the hand on their piece rotates one time. One time. So I was looking at these clocks, at these timepieces, at these things. And sure enough, I saw the name of people that I recognized. All these names of people who were still alive. I had died. There's my wife, Diane. Her hand isn't moving at all, of course. And I kept looking at all my friends. There's Marianne Downs. I saw her name there. Larry Paris. It moved once, but that was all. You know, I stood there for about 4 hours. Larry's moved one time. 4 hours. And I eventually, in time, I looked at every single name of every single person I knew. But there was one name I didn't see. After looking at all of these timepieces, I said, Peter, where's John Kirkos? And he said, they've taken his into the office. They're using it for a fan. So, we're going to talk about sin. And this is the story. It's found in a gospel written by somebody. We don't know his name, but in the oldest manuscripts we have of this, it says the gospel according to John. So we'll call him John. And it's found in chapter 8, at the very beginning. It says this, at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, he being Jesus of Nazareth. By the way, I'm a big Jesus fan. Big Jesus fan. I don't believe in Christ. Does that sound kind of weird to you? Jesus is a historical person who really lived. Christ is a figment of the early church's imagination. They attached that term to him. So I'm not a Jesus Christ or a Christ fan. I'm a Jesus fan. Jesus freak, they called it when I was a teenager. Jesus freak. At dawn, Jesus appeared in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach. Whenever Jesus teaches something important in the stories found in the Gospels, he sits down. So I sit down. I also sit down because I have a ruptured disc in my back, and to stand for more than about 15 minutes really does start to wear on me. So, bad back. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, caught in the very act. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And at this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Or as the King James Version says, "Go and sin no more," which is laughable. I mean, think about that. Come on. I prefer the New International Version translation. "Go and leave your life of sin." Leaves a little door open for being human. You know. This is a remarkable story. It is remarkable not only in what it says, but it's remarkable that we have it at all. Because when you open a Bible, any translation, and you look at John chapter 8, there's a little explanatory statement in very small print right before the beginning of John chapter 8. And this is what it says: "The earliest and most reliable manuscripts and other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53, which is the last verse of chapter 7, to chapter 8, verses 11, which was the last verse we read of the story. That story does not exist in any of the earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of John. We have extant. I love that word, extant. It just means in our possession. We have right now in our possession 25,000 manuscripts of the Gospel of John, either with Gospels or with the entire Bible or just by itself. 25,000 manuscripts written before 500 AD. Jesus died around 30 AD, which means that these great stories, which were passed on by word of mouth for a long time, were eventually written down. And the first manuscript that ever had that story written down, we probably don't have, but there were copies made. These people loved to make copies. And copyists were working nonstop, and they were distributing those copies like the leaves of autumn, you know. And we have 25,000 in the first 500 years. Not one of those copies of the Gospel of John contains this story. Isn't that amazing? This story doesn't belong in the Bible. And yet, I believe it has Jesus written all over it. If this didn't happen, it should have happened. If this didn't happen, it probably could have happened, and probably something like that did happen. Think about this. Here's a woman who has been trapped into making love to somebody for the sole purpose of trying to trap Jesus. Here's a woman who has been maneuvered into a situation where she is committing adultery. Whether she's the married one or the man that she's making love to is the married one, it's not said. But then she is brought out from the very act, dragged outside, and thrown at Jesus. I mean, how cruel is that? If you look at the Levitical text, the law of Moses, that talks about what to do with people caught in adultery, it says that if a man and a woman have committed adultery, they are both to be stoned, and yet they only bring her. Where's the man? And how come he gets off scot-free? See, he's part of the plot. This is a sick story. The sick man. This is sick. I mean, really, it's so awful. And so Jesus, instead of getting into a big debate about it, he simply kneels down on the ground and starts to write. So we know that he could write. Because as far as we know, Jesus never wrote anything that we have today. He didn't write any books or anything. No articles for, the Huffington Post or anything. He just doesn't write. Yet we know he can. He was a very educated young man. Okay? And so he writes something. What do you think he's writing on the ground? How many of you have heard this story before today? Let me see your hands. Okay, so those of you who are hearing it for the first time, what do you think he's writing? And he writes, and they keep questioning him as he's writing. They're just badgering him with all kinds of things. And so he stands up, and he says, all right, let him who, or her, let the one who is without sin among us throw the first stone at her, and then we can all join in and have a jolly good time. Let the one without sin throw the first stone. It's amazing that one of those Pharisees didn't pick up a rock and start, because they were very self-righteous, the religious leaders of his day. I don't think Jesus ever intended to start a new religion. I don't think he ever intended to start what we call Christianity today. I believe he was a Jew who wanted to improve his faith, wanted to reform Judaism, but unfortunately the religious leaders in Jerusalem were not interested in reform or progress. They weren't. They just want to keep it the way it was. It kept them in power and kept them well fed. So Jesus, after he says that, he stoops back down again and starts writing some more, and then people start to leave, the older ones first, and then the younger ones last. Now, here's my speculation. I think what Jesus is writing down on the sand are the names of people standing right there who were guilty of the same sin. And he's writing down their names and the scenario in which they engaged in that. I really think he's doing that. And they see their name there, and they see the woman's name next to theirs, and off they go. And the older ones first, because older people like Patty and I, believe it or not, because of our experience, just the fact that we are alive this long means that we have a little bit of wisdom that maybe the younger generation doesn't have. And so you can see where this is going, and I think those older folks were wise enough to go, you know what, I got to get out of here. Because I'm going to be implicated in the same thing that this woman was caught in. So they start walking away, and then the younger ones go last. They go last because they realize, I'm not perfect either. Wasn't that a brilliant way of handling that? But what that story says more than anything else is that in the world, there is a power, perhaps more powerful than almost any other power, and that power is grace. Grace. Yeah, according to the law of Moses, the woman deserved to be stoned. No, I'm not talking about marijuana now. She's got rocks, okay? She deserved, according to the law of Moses, Jesus comes along and says, I'd like to reform my religion. I'd like to make it better. And the way to make it better is to have it be grace-oriented. So he extends that to the woman. If anybody deserved to throw a stone at her, it would be Jesus, wouldn't you think? And yet Jesus probably wasn't perfect either. It's hard for some people in my faith to reckon with this, that Jesus might have actually stolen something as a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, No, Jesus never made a mistake. Jesus never made a mistake. No, Jesus was a human being. Jesus, he may not have been as pure as Patty, but he's as good as just about anybody else. So, the grace that comes from God, Jesus puts into practice. I never find one example in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, the four Gospels, of Jesus ever excluding anybody for any reason from his fellowship, his friendship, his embrace. Nobody. I mean, he has some harsh things to say to the religious leaders because they are so hypocritical and mean-spirited. So Jesus did not have any time for mean-spirited people. And yet, he was gentle with them too, because he doesn't yell at them here. He just goes down on the ground and starts to write something. You know, that's a very subtle way of saying, okay, let's all pause and get our act together. You know. So, grace. If we could learn how to extend that. And it's not easy. It's not easy, especially in this highly politically, what's the verb that I could use here, adjective? Polarized. And I mean, it's really hard. It's hard to extend grace to a person who believes the polar opposite of you on important matters relating to human behavior, human beings, and how we deal with the world. It's hard, and yet I think the Spirit that is God would like for us to learn to do that, even with our enemies. You know, Jesus said, love your enemies. Sometimes our biggest enemies are those who are politically opposed to us. So we got to learn to stretch a little bit. I have to learn that because I'm a liberal, progressive type person. So it's not easy to do that. Jesus of Nazareth seems to be saying, extend grace to all. Stand for your convictions, but extend grace to all. And so I extend grace to you, and in spite of what it looks like, my congregation says we love you and hope that you have a wonderful future. And we will never throw a stone at you. Thank you all. God bless you.